At first, they don't look dangerous. In fact, they often look like the exact opposite. They are charming, confident, magnetic, the kind of person who walks into a room and somehow becomes the center of attention without even trying. People feel drawn to them. They seem interesting, mysterious, sometimes even admirable. And that's exactly where the trap begins. Because narcissists rarely control people with obvious force. They control people with psychology. They control people with perception. And most people never realize they're being manipulated until the damage is already done. Think about the first time someone made you feel truly special. Maybe they listened to everything you said. Maybe they complimented you in ways no one ever had before. Maybe they made you feel like you were the most important person in the world. For a moment, it felt incredible, like you were finally understood. But what if that feeling wasn't genuine? What if it was designed? One of the most powerful tools narcissists use is something psychologists call love bombing. In the beginning, they overwhelm you with attention, messages all day, compliments that feel almost too perfect, promises about the future. They mirror your interests, your beliefs, your dreams. If you love music, they suddenly love the same music. If you care deeply about something, they suddenly care about it too. You start to feel a strange connection, like you've finally met someone who truly understands you. But here's the unsettling truth. They're not connecting with you. They're studying you. Every conversation becomes information. Every emotional reaction becomes data. They are quietly learning what makes you feel valued, what makes you feel insecure, what makes you afraid. And later, they will use all of it. At first, the relationship feels intense, almost magical, but slowly something begins to shift. The compliments become less frequent. The warmth becomes colder. And the person who once made you feel extraordinary suddenly starts making you question yourself. Maybe they begin with small comments. You're being too sensitive. You're overthinking things. Why do you always create problems? At first, it feels minor, but these small comments are not random. They are carefully placed seeds of doubt. Because narcissists understand something most people don't. If they can control how you see yourself, they can control everything else. This is where a psychological tactic called gaslighting begins. Gaslighting is not simply lying. It's much more disturbing than that. It's the slow rewriting of your reality. Imagine confronting someone because something they did hurt you. Instead of acknowledging it, they laugh. That never happened. You're imagining things. You always twist the story. The first time, it confuses you. The second time, it frustrates you. But after enough repetition, something strange begins to happen. You stop trusting your own memory. You start asking yourself questions you never used to ask. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe I overreacted. Maybe this really is my fault. And that moment is exactly what the narcissist wants. Because once a person doubts their own perception, they become easier to control. But the manipulation doesn't stop there. Narcissists also understand the power of emotional rewards. Think about how casinos keep people gambling. They don't reward every attempt. They reward randomly. Sometimes you win. Most of the time you lose. But those rare wins keep you addicted. Narcissists use the same psychological pattern. After days of coldness, they suddenly become affectionate again. After criticizing you, they suddenly praise you. After ignoring you, they suddenly show intense attention. And that small moment of warmth feels powerful, relieving, almost addictive. Because your brain starts chasing it. You begin trying harder to please them, trying harder not to upset them, trying harder to return to the version of them that once made you feel special. But the truth is, that version was never real. Another tactic narcissists often use is subtle isolation, and it rarely happens in obvious ways. They don't usually say, "Stop talking to your friends." Instead, they plant ideas. Your friends don't really support you. Your family never understood you like I do. They're jealous of what we have. Little by little, the people around you begin to feel distant. Arguments happen. Misunderstandings grow. And eventually, you find yourself depending more and more on the narcissist because they have slowly positioned themselves as the only person who truly understands you. But isolation serves another purpose. Without outside perspectives, manipulation becomes harder to detect. Imagine being in a room where someone constantly tells you the lights are off, even though you can clearly see the light. If enough time passes, and no one else is there to confirm what you see, doubt begins to creep in, and that doubt becomes power. In workplaces, the same pattern appears in a different form. A narcissistic boss might publicly praise someone one day, then quietly undermine them the next. They may take credit for others' work, or subtly create competition between coworkers. Why? Because division prevents unity. And people who are divided rarely challenge authority. Narcissists thrive in environments where people question themselves more than they question the narcissist. But one of the darkest aspects of narcissistic psychology is something many people never expect. Narcissists often play the victim. When confronted with their behavior, they rarely accept responsibility. Instead, they flip the narrative. Suddenly, they're the misunderstood one, the hurt one, the one who has been treated unfairly. And the person who confronted them begins to feel guilty. The focus shifts away from their actions and toward their emotions. It's a psychological reversal, and it works surprisingly well, because most empathetic people struggle with the idea of hurting someone else. Narcissists understand that empathy can be used as a weapon. But here's the uncomfortable truth most people avoid. Narcissists do not manipulate everyone. They choose their targets carefully. They often look for people who are compassionate, people who try to understand others, people who believe relationships should be fixed, not abandoned. In other words, the very traits that make someone kind can also make them vulnerable. But eventually, something begins to change. Small inconsistencies become harder to ignore. Moments of clarity appear. You notice how different they act around other people. You notice how every argument somehow becomes your fault. You notice how your confidence has slowly faded over time. And a quiet question appears in your mind. What if I'm not the problem? For many people, that question is the beginning of awakening, because once awareness begins, the psychological control weakens. Narcissists rely heavily on confusion. They rely on emotional exhaustion. They rely on the belief that you are responsible for fixing the relationship. But when a person begins to see the pattern, the illusion cracks. You start noticing the cycle, the charm, the criticism, the distance, the affection, the manipulation, and suddenly their behavior becomes predictable. But protecting yourself from narcissistic control requires something that feels uncomfortable at first: boundaries. Clear boundaries remove the emotional leverage narcissists depend on. When manipulation stops producing reactions, it loses power. This doesn't mean confronting them with anger. In fact, emotional reactions often fuel their control. Instead, it means stepping back, observing behavior rather than arguing about it, trusting your own perception again, and perhaps most importantly, reconnecting with people outside the narcissist's influence. Because outside perspectives restore something manipulation tries to erase: reality. Healthy relationships do not make you constantly question your worth. Healthy relationships do not leave you feeling emotionally drained all the time. Healthy relationships do not require you to shrink yourself so someone else can feel bigger. But recognizing this truth can be difficult, because narcissistic manipulation rarely feels obvious while it's happening. It feels confusing, emotional, complicated, which is why so many people stay in these dynamics longer than they should, not because they are weak, but because they are human. And humans naturally try to repair things they care about, but sometimes The most powerful psychological shift a person can make is realizing that not every relationship is meant to be fixed. Some are meant to be understood and then left behind. Because once you truly see the patterns of manipulation, once you understand how charm can be used as a weapon, once you realize how easily perception can be distorted, you begin to notice something unsettling. These behaviors exist in more places than you once thought. In relationships, in workplaces, in friendships, even in people who appear successful and admired. And that realization raises a quiet question, a question most people rarely ask themselves. How many of our emotional decisions are truly ours? And how many were carefully influenced by someone who understood our mind better than we did?